Hi, I'm Vesper. I hadn't seen my father in 5 years, but the night I rushed to his mansion, thinking he was dying, a stranger pulled me back and whispered, "Don't go in, hide, and trust me." I did. I froze behind the door, and through a crack I saw my sister, pouring something into our father's drink. Her husband smiled and said, "Once this is done, the $300 million will be ours." They weren't grieving, they were hunting. And that night, I learned the only thing more poisonous than betrayal is family. But here's the question. If your blood turns to ice, do you still stay quiet, or do you burn the whole house down? Before we begin, tell me, where are you listening from, and what would you have done? They called me right after sunset. "Miss Ashbourne," the voice had said, clipped, formal, unsure. "Your father collapsed. He's stable, for now." I don't remember how I drove there. One moment, I was in my apartment in Cambridge, with leftover Chinese on the table, and the next, I was standing in front of the gates of the Ashbourne estate, my breath fogging in the cold air, heart knocking like it wanted out. The house hadn't changed. Still that towering gray stone, manicured hedges like they were cut with razors, and silence you could choke on. It looked like a castle from a distance, but inside, it was something else entirely. A mausoleum for pride, money, and things no one dared to name. I stepped inside, the foyer swallowed me. My heels clicked against marble too pristine to touch. Chandeliers above, dustless. Oil portraits lining the walls, each one more judging than the last. And in that air, thick with lemon polish and secrets, I caught it. The smell I hadn't realized I remembered. My childhood, locked in cedar and silence. "Dad!" My voice echoed down the hall, thin and too small. No answer. I reached into my coat pocket. My fingers grazed the corner of a folded white handkerchief. VA, stitched in blue thread. My initials. He gave it to me when I was 12 before I left for boarding school. He never said, "I love you," but he gave me that. I gripped it now like it meant something. I moved past the grand staircase, down the east corridor. Lights flickered overhead. Still no staff, no family. Just me, and that old gnawing feeling I never truly belonged here. I turned the corner toward his study, and that's when I saw her. A woman in a nurse's uniform, early 30s maybe. Pale, eyes wide like she'd seen something no one should. She stepped from the side hallway and grabbed my wrist, tight. "Don't go in," she whispered. "Hide, and trust me." I didn't move. Couldn't. Her grip tightened. "There's no time," she hissed. "They'll see you." And then she shoved me, gently but firmly, into the side corridor, behind a wooden lattice. From there, I could see the study through a narrow slit in the door. What I saw, I forgot to breathe. Isolde, my sister, always pristine, always in control. She stood by our father's recliner in a black silk suit, like she was at a board meeting, not at his bedside. Beside her, Cassian, her husband. Sharp suit, slicked back hair, hands clasped like he was waiting for a deal to close. My father lay in the chair, motionless. His chest rose, barely. Oxygen hissed from a tank beside him. Cassian pulled something from his coat. A vial. He uncapped it, and I saw a thick amber liquid slide into a crystal water glass. "He's too weak to fight it," Isolde murmured. Cassian's voice was colder than the room. "Once this is done, the $300 million is ours." I didn't understand. Not right away. It hit me slow, like frostbite. Then all at once. They were killing him. My knees buckled. I would have made a sound if the nurse hadn't clamped her hand over my mouth. I could feel my pulse in my skull. My breath caught and burned. "If you go in there," she whispered, barely audible, "you'll die too." I stared through the crack. My sister lifted the glass. My father stirred, just a twitch, and she leaned in, helping him sip. He didn't resist. "Rest now, father," she said softly. The hand holding the glass trembled. She looked over her shoulder. My heart stopped. Did she see me? But Cassian said nothing. He stepped to the sink, dumped the leftover liquid, wiped the counter with a cloth like he'd done it 100 times. My father's hand slipped from the armrest. Limp. Still. Isolde pressed her fingers to his pulse. Nothing. She smiled. I stumbled back, shaking. The nurse was gone. I didn't hear her leave, didn't even hear my own breathing. Just the echo of that clinking glass, and a sound behind me. Footsteps. Then a whisper, right behind my ear. "You shouldn't have come back, Vesper." The voice was steady, familiar, not cruel, but not kind either. I turned slowly, and there he was. Heath Calder. He looked exactly like the memory I kept locked away in my bottom drawer, the one I never dared revisit. Same clean-cut jawline, same storm gray eyes that used to study me like a puzzle he could never quite solve. Only now they looked tired, sharper, as if he hadn't been sleeping for months. "You shouldn't have come back, Vesper," he said again, quieter this time. I stepped toward him, gripping the edge of the corridor wall to stay upright. Heath. They're killing him. Isolde and Cassian. I saw it. His eyes didn't flicker, not even a blink. That silence. It said too much. "You knew?" My voice cracked. "You knew and you didn't stop them?" He scanned the hallway behind me, then pulled me by the wrist. Not rough, but insistent. "Keep your voice down. You don't know what you've stepped into." We moved down a narrow hallway, one I barely remembered from childhood. No lights, just creaking wood and old portraits with eyes that followed. He opened a door I hadn't noticed before. The scent hit me first. Mildew, mothballs, and old secrets. The servant's passage. No one had used it in decades. I turned on him. "Talk, now." He leaned against the wall, folded his arms. "Your father changed his will a month ago." I waited, heart pounding. "He didn't tell anyone. Not the board, not the lawyers, just me and a notary who's already missing." He ran a hand through his hair. "There's more than one version of the will floating around now. One of them's fake. Guess which one your sister's about to sign." "What does that mean?" I snapped. "What the hell does any of this mean?" He shook his head. "It means you can't trust anyone in this house. Not even the staff. Not even me." I blinked. "Then why warn me?" He looked at me for a long beat. "Because I used to love you," he said. "And maybe I still do, but that doesn't mean I'm on your side." Before I could answer, he was gone, slipping down the hallway like smoke, leaving me alone with the creak of ancient floorboards and a pit growing in my stomach. I leaned against the wall and closed my eyes. Silence. Then thunder in the distance. It had started to rain. I looked down and saw the handkerchief in my palm. Still folded, still white. A gift from the only man who'd ever tried to raise me right, in his own cold, flawed way. I must have dropped it when Heath pulled me. I bent down, picked it up, and held it to my chest. The scent of the hallway shifted. Damp air, dust. Something sweeter beneath it. Faint, familiar, piano polish. And just like that, a memory bloomed. I was 9, maybe 10. Barefoot, legs swinging from the bench, struggling to reach the pedals. My father standing behind me, pressing my fingers to the keys. "Your sister," he'd said, "will build the empire." I kept playing, fumbling through the notes. "But you, Vesper, you'll give it a soul." Back then, I thought that meant something. I thought being the heart of the family counted. But now I knew better. "Souls don't matter when money's on the table," I muttered. And still, somewhere inside me, I hoped he had meant it, that the man I saw dying minutes ago hadn't truly forgotten who I was. The thunder rolled again. I moved down the passage, hand grazing the wall for balance, and found my way back to the study. The door was ajar. The lights inside dimmed. The room was empty. The recliner overturned, the glass gone. One window cracked open, rain trailing down the sill. I stepped closer and caught it, a faint scent, bitter and sweet at once. Almonds. I pressed a hand to my mouth. Whoever did this wanted it to look clean. Accidental, but they weren't careful enough. I moved to the desk. Papers were scattered. The lamp cast a yellow halo over them. And there, just visible, a signature. My father's. Incomplete. The pen beside it still glistened. He hadn't finished signing. That meant he had been interrupted, or stopped. The ache in my chest turned to heat. Anger, helpless, useless fury. I stared at the signature, at what might have been his last act. Footsteps, soft, slow, deliberate. I slipped behind the curtains before I even thought. Through the gap, I saw her, Isolde. Perfect posture, calm face, hair like she just stepped off a runway. Her heels tapped against the wood like punctuation. "Father?" she called gently. She walked to the desk, sat down, opened a folder from her bag, labeled Ashbourne Holdings, and pulled out a document. Then, like she was signing for a dinner reservation, she placed her name at the bottom. She closed the folder, tapped it into alignment, and whispered, "Now it's done." She started to rise, and then stopped. Her head turned, slowly, eyes right to where I hid, and then she smiled. "I know you're here, Vesper." The rain hammered the windows like a warning. Isolde's voice carried through the house long after she'd left the room, a brittle echo that clung to the wallpaper. I stayed still, listening to the storm, the steady pulse in my ears, and the slow thaw of disbelief that had started somewhere between the glass and the handkerchief in my palm. When I opened the curtain, the library felt different, a private, breathing place rather than a mausoleum. Books lined every wall, their spines a record of the family's arrogance. The lamp on the desk threw a pool of light across papers that should never have been left loose. Isolde's smile for me had been the kind of thing meant to disarm cameras. It wasn't meant for me. "You were always bad at hiding, little sister," she'd said. I wanted to say a dozen things back, sharp and fierce, but all that came out was a flat, "You murdered him." She let the word hang, then laughed in that too-perfect way she used on gala stages and real estate panels. "You always dramatize, Vesper. Father was ill. You just never made the time." Her words were a trap. She spoke like an expert rewriting the past. Plenty of conviction, very little truth. The library's hush folded that voice into something heavier. She walked to the desk and sat like she belonged there by right. Cassian had spoken about the estate as if it were a ledger entry. Isolde signed a line, then another. "I, Ashbourne," she murmured, and CEO, acting, followed on the paper like a piece of theater. "You don't get to do that," I said. She glanced up, smile unmoved. "Which will? There are at least 2 copies in circulation. Your father has always loved drama." I said, "Show me the original." She cocked her head. "Which one? The one he drafted with Heath last month? The one he left unsigned? Or the pale, burnt sheet you'll find under those ashes?" Her hand swept a loose stack of papers. "Which one are you referring to?" Anger rose slow and hot. Her arrogance had a way of making the world tilt. She'd always been the one who could turn accusation into guilt. I could feel it, how the fabric of the whole house conspired to make me small. But beneath that old familiar burn was something else. A steadier pulse, refusal. "You're lying," I said, and I meant it. She smiled then in a way that wasn't warm. "Am I? Or am I finally honest, Vesper? You walked away years ago. You left. You abandoned him. If you'd been here, perhaps none of this would be necessary." It was the oldest trick. If you can't deny guilt, invert it. Make the absent one guilty for absence. Pin the crime on the one person who loved him enough to care. The room bent toward her story. I felt the old pressure of being the scapegoat, the quiet daughter never listened to, always blamed. I stepped back, breath shallow. Mirrors along the hallway had been draped, an old house custom when someone died. I remembered my mother's reflection, always half hidden by a cloth, and the way silence had become a family value. Here, silence had teeth. When I reached the hall, Heath's warning, "Keep your voice down," looped in my head. I needed something tangible, a place where truth could exist untwisted. That's when I found Eliza again, squeezing through a side door like she'd come out of the woodwork. She was shaking, small and real, and she looked as if she'd been running on prayer. "You can't stay where you are," she breathed. "They'll figure it out." "Who are you?" I asked, pinning her with a look that needed trust. "Eliza," she said. "I've worked for your father for years. He trusted me. She hesitated, eyes flicking to Isolde's closed office door. "He left something for you." She pushed a tiny key into my hand. It was cold, the metal worn smooth by pockets and time. On its bow, someone had engraved a tiny word, West. Hope arrived like a soft flicker. I tucked the key into my palm and wished for courage that felt less like a borrowed thing. We moved through the house as if the floor might give way. Every footfall was loud. The storm outside thudded bone deep. The west wing door sighed open with a reluctant click. The room beyond was smaller, a private study that smelled of tobacco and old ink. A safe sat half hidden in a cabinet. On the desk, a paper smoldered black at the edges, as if someone had tried to destroy it in a rush. The majority of the sheet was intact, though. My father's handwriting, the slanted, careful letters I'd read in his notes when I was a child. To my daughters, equally, provided honesty remains. My throat tightened. He had expected deceit. He had anticipated the possibility that his own blood would try to rewrite what mattered. I read the lines again until the words felt like a small, steady heartbeat in the room. This was proof, the kind that could cut through the performance, the original, his intent inked in black on the paper. If this document survived, nothing Cassian or Isolde said could hold. A thin sound behind me made me jump. In the glass of the cabinet, a shadow moved, then resolved into Cassian's reflection, calm as he always was, his face a study of control. He stepped into the doorway as if he owned the threshold. "Looking for something, Vesper?" he asked, voice easy as a man ordering coffee. But his hand was visible in the reflection, and there was a glint, metal against glass, the faint clinical shine of a vial. My breath snagged. The room seemed to tighten, the edges of everything sharper. The paper in my hands was suddenly heavier than wealth. "You don't understand," Cassian said. "You left. You made choices. But this—" He glanced at the document as if it were a prop. "This house needs leadership. Your sister will give it what it needs." I could feel the old story trying to drag me back. The timid daughter, always outplayed. But the will, my father's words, rested in my hands like a challenge. The house had tried to silence the truth. It had miscalculated. I folded the paper into my palm, careful not to crease the signature. I thought of the handkerchief pressed in my coat. I thought of Heath's tired eyes. I thought of Eliza's fingers, small but determined. My voice was steady because for the first time in years, I believed it. "You're not going to get away with this." Cassian smiled, and the smile didn't reach his eyes. "We already have." The rain struck harder, hammering the windows as if to drown us out. Outside, thunder rolled like a drumbeat calling time. I held my father's words like a ledger against their lies. I didn't know how to turn it into weaponry yet, but I had the paper, proof. That changed everything. The paper trembled slightly in my hands, the ink still ghosting under my fingertips. My father's words, his final trace of clarity, burned in my mind. I had proof, but I also had company. "You shouldn't touch what doesn't belong to you." Cassian's voice slid through the air like a knife wrapped in silk. I turned. He was standing in the doorway, one hand tucked neatly into his pocket, the other still nursing the bruise from the drawer. His calm was worse than rage. It was deliberate. I hid the document behind my back. "You killed him," I said, barely recognizing my own voice. Cassian smiled, not with amusement, but with the kind of pity that made you question your own sanity. "No, Vesper, I saved him. Your father was a proud man. He couldn't stand the idea of watching everything he built crumble under his own name. He was losing control. I simply gave him peace." He took a step forward, then another. The floor creaked under his shoes. The scent of rain drifted in through the cracked window. Wet earth and old wood. "Peace?" I repeated. "You poisoned him." He tilted his head, the corners of his mouth softening. "Mercy is a matter of perspective." His words hung in the air, heavy and clinical. I could feel the mansion pressing in around me, the walls, the storm, the smell of death that hadn't quite settled. "Step away," I said quietly. He laughed softly. "You've always had that Ashbourne fire, just like your father. You think truth wins battles. It doesn't. Control does." I moved back toward the desk. My hand brushed the edge of the document, and that's when I saw it, another line at the bottom of the page. Faded ink, half burned but still legible. "In the event of my unnatural death, contact Heath Calder." My heart stopped. Heath. The man who had warned me, the man who had vanished. Cassian's gaze followed mine. "Oh, that?" he said smoothly. "He knew we'd come for it. That's why he made 2 copies. The one you're holding, it's not the one that matters." He reached out. I slammed the drawer shut, hard on his hand. The crack of bone and the sharp inhale that followed felt like justice, brief and fleeting. Cassian staggered back, cursing under his breath, eyes flashing dark. "You'll regret that." I didn't wait to find out how. I ran. The corridors of the West Wing twisted like veins through the body of the house, narrow, secret, built for servants who no longer existed. My shoes slid on the old tiles as I clutched the paper and the key in my fist. Behind me, Cassian's voice followed, steady, unhurried, terrifyingly sure. "You can run, Vesper, but remember, I write the laws here." His words echoed through the walls as I ducked into a side passage. Dust filled my throat. The narrow space was lined with forgotten furniture, old trunks, a lamp that still held the faint smell of kerosene. I crouched there, trying to quiet my breathing. Somewhere beyond, a dazo clock ticked, steady, rhythmic. For a second, I thought it was the house again. Then I realized it was me. My own pulse, loud in my ears, keeping time with the storm outside. I waited, counted. When the silence settled again, I slipped out through a narrow door and found myself in the main hall. The dawn light bled through the tall windows, pale and cold. And there she was, Isolde, standing at the end of the dining table, immaculate as always. Her black dress fit like armor, not a hair out of place. She sipped from a porcelain cup as if the world hadn't just shifted beneath us. "You look tired," she said softly, "like Mother did at the end." Her voice was velvet over poison. "Don't talk about her," I said. "Why not?" She tilted her head, her eyes sharp and calculating. She couldn't handle the truth either. Maybe it's genetic. Something broke inside me then, not with noise, but with quiet, final understanding. "You did that to her too," I whispered. Her smile didn't falter. She wasn't strong enough. Father thought love made people loyal. I proved him wrong. The room seemed to tilt. My chest tightened until it hurt to breathe. My mother's face flashed in my mind, gentle, fading, always apologizing for things that weren't her fault. "You manipulated her," I said. "You isolated her until she broke." "She would have ruined us," Isolde said simply, as if explaining a business decision. "You can't build an empire on weakness." The word empire scraped against me like broken glass. I stepped forward and slammed the torn page onto the table between us. "You think this house makes you powerful? It's a tomb. You're just another ghost haunting it." Isolde's gaze flicked to the paper, then back to me. "Then stay buried." Footsteps behind me. Cassian entered the room, pale but composed, his injured hand tucked in a handkerchief. "Shall we clean this up?" he said lightly. She didn't even look at him. "Father's funeral will be at noon," she said. "After that, Vesper disappears again, this time for good." I stood there, feeling the rage settle into something cold and sharp. I had proof, I had truth, but they had the house, the money, the power. And then a buzz shattered the silence. My phone, glowing faintly on the table, an unknown number, one message. "I have the real will. Meet me at the cemetery." I looked up slowly and caught Isolde's reflection in the silver teapot beside her. She was already smiling, as if she had sent the message herself. The thunder had barely faded when I grabbed my coat and left the mansion behind. The sky hung low and gray, pressing down on the world like a secret no one wanted to keep anymore. I drove through the old estate road, the one that wound through the trees and past the fields that used to be filled with horses. The fog curled around the car, thick and white, swallowing everything but the headlights. The further I went, the quieter it became. The mansion disappeared behind me, a memory I wasn't ready to let go of, but couldn't bear to look back at. The rain had softened into a drizzle, steady and thin. The cemetery gates stood open, crooked on their hinges. The sign still read, "Ashbourne Family Grounds," the letters chipped and faded. Beyond them, rows of marble stretched into the mist, generations of names carved into stone, men and women who had ruled companies, chaired foundations, ruined lives. Power written in granite. I parked beside the oldest mausoleum, its roof slick with moss, and stepped out. My shoes sank into the soft earth. The air smelled of wet flowers and rust. That's when I saw him. Heath stepped out from the fog, the shape of him forming slowly like a ghost, remembering how to be human. His suit was damp, his hair clinging to his forehead, his eyes ringed with exhaustion. "You shouldn't have come," he said quietly. I almost laughed, though it came out as a shiver. "You said that last night, and yet here I am." He looked down at the ground for a long time before answering. "I was part of it, Vesper. Not all of it, but enough. At first, I believed what Cassian said, that your father was losing control, that he'd ruin the company if someone didn't step in. I helped them. I signed things I shouldn't have." My heart twisted, not with surprise, but with something duller. Resignation. "You were supposed to protect him." He met my eyes then, and for a second I saw the man I used to trust. I did, at first. Then I realized what they really planned. By the time I tried to undo it, it was too late. He reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. Inside was a small USB drive, the kind my father used for business files. He held it out to me like an apology. "Your father recorded everything, his will, his thoughts, his suspicions. He knew Isolde and Cassian were up to something, but he didn't think it would come to this. He asked me to keep this safe until he couldn't." I stared at it, barely able to breathe. "Why now? Why help me now?" He took a step closer. "Because he asked me to," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "He said you'd be the only one strong enough to outlive this house." The words cracked something open inside me. For the first time since I came back, I let myself cry. Not loud, not messy, but quiet tears that tasted like exhaustion. He didn't touch me. He just stood there, letting the silence hold us both. I slipped the USB into my pocket and nodded toward my car. "We can look at it together." He shook his head. "No, you'll need to see it alone." Back inside the car, the laptop screen glowed pale against the morning fog. The file opened after a long pause. Then my father's face appeared. Thinner, older, his voice soft but clear. "If you're watching this," he began, "then my fear was right. Isolde's ambition has no end, and Cassian, he's worse. Vesper, I failed you. I built something strong but forgot to make it kind. And now the house will eat itself unless you stop them." My throat closed. Behind him, I saw the same crystal glass sitting untouched on the desk, and beside it, my white handkerchief, folded neatly. He continued, his voice trembling now. "The truth is hidden where they'll never think to look. In the glass." The video froze. The words echoed in my head. "In the glass." I turned to Heath, my voice barely working. "He said the glass. What does that mean?" Before he could answer, headlights cut through the fog. Two beams slicing across the graves. A car, black and slow, pulled up near the gate. Heath's expression changed instantly. "They followed you," he whispered. "What?" He grabbed my arm, his voice sharp now. "Get down!" But the sound came before I moved. A single gunshot, clean and final. Heath staggered backward, confusion on his face, then fell to his knees. I caught him before he hit the ground. Blood pooled beneath him, dark against the wet grass. He tried to speak, the words catching in his throat. "The glass vault." Then he was still. I sat there, kneeling in the mud, my hands pressed against the wound that no longer needed saving. There was no scream left in me, just a hollow quiet. The fog thickened. I could barely see the car anymore. Whoever fired had already gone, leaving me alone with the dead again. I stayed that way for what felt like hours. The USB in one hand, the handkerchief in the other. My father's words still played in my head. "You must not fail yourself." When I finally stood, my phone buzzed. A new message, unknown number. "Next time, don't bring witnesses." My breath caught. I spun around. The cemetery was empty. The trees still, the fog unmoving. But then I saw it. A shape, barely visible through the mist. Tall, still, holding an umbrella. The outline was unmistakable. It looked exactly like my father. The rain thinned to mist as I turned the car around, the tires crunching over gravel soaked red. I didn't look back. Heath's body was behind me now, but the war in front of me had only just begun. My hands trembled on the wheel. Not from fear, not anymore, but fury, hot and cold at once, as steady as the ache in my chest. A single white rose lay on the passenger seat. I didn't remember picking it up. I couldn't tell if it had been meant as a warning or as a final mercy. By the time I reached the mansion, the sky was brighter, but the house still loomed under gray. The windshield was cracked from where I had slammed the door earlier, small fractures spidering out like the family tree. Inside, the air was too quiet. The staff moved like shadows, deliberate, distant. No one met my eyes. The house had chosen its loyalties. I headed straight for the library. The floor creaked under my steps like it remembered every secret I'd ever tried to forget. I sat at the desk and opened the laptop again. The video of my father flickered to life. This time, I didn't listen to his words. I watched the room around him, every detail, every reflection. And there it was, just behind his right shoulder, faintly visible in the mirror, the edge of a panel. One I'd never noticed, even after years of growing up in that room. I moved quickly. The piano in the corner had always been off-limits as children, Isolde used to joke that it was out of tune with the future. I slid it aside, careful not to scrape the wood. My fingers traced the panel until I found the groove. I took the key Eliza had given me, small, thin, nearly invisible, and turned it. The click was soft but deep, like the house exhaled. Inside the hidden compartment sat a clear glass case, sealed, pristine. A label in my father's handwriting read, Ashbourne Trust. Final revision. My throat tightened. Then I heard it. Footsteps, not rushed, but purposeful. I braced myself, but it was Eliza. She stood at the threshold, her eyes wide. "You found it," she said, barely audible. "You knew it was here." She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "He told me a week before the end. He said if something happened, to guide you, but if they find out I helped, they won't," I said quickly. "Not if we move now." Together, we lifted the documents from the vault. Legal files, dated amendments, and something else. A sealed letter, addressed to me. We didn't read it there. There wasn't time. In the hallway, I heard it. A ring, high and sharp, echoing from the end of the corridor. Eliza's phone buzzed. On the screen, Cassian's name lit up. She hit speaker. "Good afternoon, Ms. Vesper," his voice sang. "I do hope you're not planning anything impulsive." I felt the blood drain from my face. "You're being watched," he continued smoothly. "Heath should have remembered that. Maybe you will." I looked up. The red lights on the Ausreut. Security cameras blinked like tiny, smug eyes. Eliza whispered, "They see everything." Of course they did. The estate's surveillance system wasn't just for security. It was a trap, one Heath hadn't escaped. Eliza turned to me, her face pale. "Take the papers. Get out. Don't stay here. You've got what you need. Run." But I shook my head. Running is how they win. I walked to the fireplace. The room was still being recorded. I knew that. I took a photocopy of the top page and held it up for the camera, then lit a match and set it aflame. "Here's your show, Cassian," I said softly. The flames licked up the edge of the page, curling it into ash. He could gloat over that one, but the real copy? I slid it behind the old portrait of my mother in the sitting room, her smile still as soft and unreadable as it was the day she disappeared from this house. No one ever touched that painting, not even Isolde. With the rest of the documents hidden in my coat, I left through the side entrance. I didn't say a word to the staff, didn't glance back. I drove straight to downtown, my father's old law office tucked between two red brick buildings, untouched for years. It still bore the etched plaque, J. Ashbourne and Associates. The door was locked, but the spare key was still taped under the mailbox. Inside, the air was stale but familiar. Dust coated the surfaces like time had stopped the moment he stepped away. I made my way to his desk. The same clock sat on the corner, stopped at 11:11, the exact time I walked out of this house the first time, nearly 10 years ago. I brushed my hand over it and sat down. I powered up the office terminal and connected the USB. The system blinked, then asked for a biometric signature. I placed my hand on the pad. It scanned, matched, access granted. Files uploaded, encrypted, sent directly to his private client network. One I knew Cassian hadn't touched yet. My phone buzzed. A video call, no number. I answered. Isolde's face filled the screen, her expression perfectly composed. She wore black already, funeral attire or maybe just armor. "Still pretending you're the victim, little sister?" she said. I didn't flinch. "No, just the witness." The silence between us stretched thin, then her smile faltered. "Well," she said finally, voice low, "I suppose it's time we meet face to face. Father's funeral is tomorrow at noon." She leaned forward slightly, her voice colder. "And if you show up, I'll finish what he started." The screen went black. I stared at my reflection. This time, the eyes staring back weren't afraid. They were mine, and they were ready. Outside the law office window, the light shifted. Not full sun, but enough to remind me that darkness never stays. I stayed there for hours, resting only in body, not mind. At some point, I must have dozed off in the chair, because when I opened my eyes, the clock on the wall read 9:47 a.m. The funeral was at noon, and I wasn't going to miss it. The drive to St. Enoch's felt like walking into a past I never wanted to revisit. The same towering stone cathedral where we buried my mother. The same bells. The same heavy sky. Only now, it wasn't grief that filled the air. It was theater. Black cars lined the curb like chess pieces. Cameras clicked as I stepped out alone, wrapped in my father's old coat. The collar still smelled faintly of pipe smoke and cedar. Familiar, unshakable. Reporters whispered, but no one dared approach. Not yet. Inside, the cathedral's hush was broken only by the low murmur of suited guests and the echo of slow, deliberate organ chords. Isolde stood at the altar like she was born on it. Black veil, perfect posture, the embodiment of mourning. Cassian beside her, jaw set, eyes watching everything. I took a seat in the second pew, ignoring the stares. She spotted me immediately. "Thank you all for coming," she began into the microphone, voice soaked in honey. "Our father was a builder, a man of vision, discipline, and legacy. He gave his life to protect what mattered. And now, it is our duty to protect it too." Then she looked directly at me. "Even from those who left when it mattered most." There it was. The knife slid in with a smile. I didn't flinch. I wouldn't give her that. After the prayers, after the choral hymn my father always hated, we moved to the reception hall next door. Polished wood floors, tall windows, trays of food no one would eat. I stood beside the casket, his initials carved into the wood like they'd last longer than he had. My fingers rested on them. Isolde approached from behind, her scent thick, floral with something sharp underneath. "You could have stayed away," she whispered. "You could have told the truth," I replied, barely turning. She smirked. "Truth is for those who can afford the fallout." Cassian joined her then, slipping something into her hand. An envelope. I caught a glimpse of the label. Transfer authorization, Ashbourne Trust. Of course. They were tying the last knot. I reached into my coat pocket and slid the white handkerchief up my sleeve. It wasn't for show, it was armor. I walked toward the lectern. The room didn't go silent, but the energy shifted. I could feel their eyes follow me. I cleared my throat and looked out at the room. My father once told me, legacy isn't what you leave behind. It's what you live with. It's honesty. Someone coughed. A few guests shifted in their chairs. Cassian's brow furrowed. "So, today," I said, "let's honor him with both." I pulled my phone from my pocket, tapped the screen, and connected it to the cathedral's built-in media feed. The file uploaded in seconds. The screen behind the altar flickered, then steadied. There he was, my father, pale, tired, but clear, speaking into the camera from his study. "If you're watching this," he said, "it means I didn't die by natural causes." The room gasped. Murmurs rippled. Cassian turned sharply toward me, eyes wide. He lunged forward. "Cut the feed!" Security looked frozen. A few glanced toward the exits. One of the ushers reached for the console, but stopped when the DA stepped forward, the same one Heath once played golf with on Saturdays. He held up a hand. "Let it play." Isolde's voice cracked as she shouted, "Turn it off!" I stepped back, letting it all unfold. The video continued. My father detailed the threats, the pills, the fake documents. He spoke of Cassian's manipulation and Isolde's quiet ambition. He named names, described dates, and finally he said, "To my daughter Vesper, may truth be your inheritance." The screen faded to black. For a moment, no one moved. Then chaos. Reporters surged forward. Cameras rolled. Voices collided. The doors opened as police entered, their presence planned, precise. I hadn't told them where, but I'd given them the file. They'd found their own timing. Cassian turned to me, face drained of color. "You think this changes anything?" he hissed near my ear. "No," I said, "but it's your turn to run." He tried to shove past the nearest officer. It didn't work. Hands grabbed him, read him his rights. Isolde stood frozen. Then something inside her broke. She dropped to the floor beside the casket, clutching the edge, her veil slipping from her head. "Daddy," she said, but not with sorrow, with fury. "You were supposed to protect me from her." Her scream cut through everything. It silenced the room more than the video ever could. As the officers led them away, a reporter shoved a mic toward me. "Ms. Ashburn, what happens to the estate now?" I looked into the camera. "Justice doesn't bring people back, but it stops the rot." I turned away, stepping back into the afternoon. A light rain had begun, not the storm kind, just a mist, gentle, almost forgiving. Behind me, someone called my name, quiet, almost fragile, but unmistakably familiar. I turned, and there she was, Eliza, standing just beyond the cathedral gates, her coat soaked through, eyes red as though she hadn't slept. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. The look in her eyes said it all. Something unfinished still lingered. I didn't stop. Not yet. There would be time later, or so I told myself. By the next morning, the story had already spread across every newspaper in Boston. My father's name was everywhere, not as a titan of industry, but as a man betrayed by his own blood. Cassian was in custody. Isolde faced charges of fraud, conspiracy, and tampering with medical evidence. The estate's accounts were frozen, the mansion declared under investigation. The courthouse steps were a blur of voices, microphones, and camera flashes. The sky was clear, but the air felt heavy. I stood off to the side, hands in the pockets of my coat, sunglasses hiding my exhaustion. Reporters shouted over one another, desperate for the headline that would make their careers. "Ms. Ashburn, how does it feel to see justice done? Do you plan to take control of the company? Will you rebuild your father's empire?" I raised a hand. The noise dimmed just enough for one more question to cut through. "Do you feel vindicated, Ms. Ashburn?" I let the silence stretch a moment before answering. "No, I feel tired." The flashbulbs went off again, chasing the grief from my face like they wanted to capture it, package it, sell it. I turned away. Later that afternoon, when the chaos outside had thinned, I returned to the mansion. It felt different now, not haunted, but hollow, empty in a way that echoed. The silence inside was vast, the kind that fills the chest until breathing feels like trespass. I walked through each hallway slowly, touching the banisters, the walls, the furniture that would soon be gone. The portraits watched me, every one of them painted in that same solemn shade of pride. My father's stern gaze, my mother's faint smile, and in between them, the clock. It still sat on the desk in the study. Its hands had stopped the day I left this house the first time. I reached out and wound it again. Tick, tick, tick. The sound carried through the hall, not accusing this time, but alive, like a pulse returning. "It's done," I whispered. For a moment I believed it. Then my phone buzzed. A single message, no name attached, encrypted. "You think Cassian was the one pulling strings? Look deeper." Attached was a photo, a legal document. One of my father's old trust revisions. The date, 2 years before I left. A second trustee listed below his signature. Heath Calder. I stared at it until my eyes blurred. Heath. The man who'd sworn he regretted everything, who died trying to make it right, had once been the one who made it possible. The betrayal burned low and cold. There was no room for anger now, only that quiet ache that comes when you realize closure doesn't always mean truth. Maybe he thought he was protecting me. Maybe he thought he could undo what he'd started. Either way, his hands weren't clean. I set the phone down and opened my father's desk drawer. Inside, under a folder of contracts, was the envelope I'd avoided for weeks. My name written in his handwriting, strong and sure. To my daughter, the one who never asked for anything. I broke the seal. Inside was a single page. Forgiveness is heavier than hate, but it lasts longer. Do not let this house make you cruel. My hands shook. It wasn't an apology. It was something else. A lesson, maybe, or an absolution he hoped I'd grow into. I folded the letter back and leaned against the desk. The clock ticked behind me, steady, indifferent. For the first time, I cried. Not for him, not even for the years lost, but for the simple truth that love and understanding had never lived in the same house for us. By evening, the movers arrived. They worked quietly, respectful but efficient, carrying out furniture and boxes of files that once held the family's power. The empire was coming apart piece by piece, and no one tried to stop it. I stepped outside into the garden. The roses were blooming again, pale and heavy from last night's rain. The air smelled of soil and water, clean for the first time in years. On the marble path, half hidden in the grass, I saw it, the white handkerchief. The one I'd carried since that night. My father's initials still embroidered in the corner. I picked it up, smoothed the fabric, then tied it around the iron gate. A signal, a marker, a line drawn. This house ends here. As I turned to leave, a car rolled up the drive. Black, unmarked, I froze. The door opened and Eliza stepped out. Her expression was different this time, calm, resolute. "You were right," she said, "about everything. But there's one more thing your father left behind." She held out a small box, made of carved glass, sealed with the Ashbourne crest. It shimmered faintly in the fading light. My pulse quickened. "What is this?" She hesitated. "He said only you could open it." I took it from her. The glass was cold, heavier than it looked. When I lifted the lid, a folded piece of paper rested inside. My father's handwriting again. "The truth, you know, is only half." I looked up. Eliza's face was pale, eyes wet with something between fear and relief. "What does that mean?" I asked. She shook her head slowly. "I think it means you're not done yet." The clock inside the house struck midnight, and in that sound, deep, patient, relentless, I realized she was right. The story wasn't over. And in that sound, deep, patient, relentless, I realized she was right. The story wasn't over. It was nearly midnight when I found myself sitting in the library again, the rain still whispering against the windows. I didn't turn on the lights. The darkness made the ticking from the study clock feel louder, like it was marking more than just time. The glass box sat on my lap. It caught the flickers of lightning now and then, glinting like a thing not meant to be opened. Or maybe just not meant to be opened by anyone else. I took a breath and lifted the lid. Inside, a silver key and a folded sheet of paper. My father's handwriting again, steady, exact. For the place where it all began. Beneath it, an address. Seaside Cottage, Gloucester. I hadn't thought about that place in years. Not since the summer before my mother died. It was where I learned to ride a bike, where I skinned my knees, where my father laughed without a glass in his hand. A storm passed through me, not fear, not dread, just quiet. The kind that follows answers too big to hold. I didn't sleep. By dawn, I was on the road, the highway empty and slick with early rain. The air was colder near the coast, sharper somehow. As I pulled into the overgrown gravel driveway, the ocean wind welcomed me like something sacred. The cottage looked forgotten. Its white paint had faded to gray-blue, the shutters hung crooked, but it stood steady, like it had waited. Inside, it smelled of dust and salt, and the kind of silence only memory brings. On the kitchen table, a photograph waited, my father holding me in his arms. I must have been 5. He looked young, happier, smiling like a man who hadn't yet broken anything. Next to it, a letter. If you're reading this, you've already faced everything I was too cowardly to confront. I built walls to protect this family and ended up trapping you inside them. The money, the legacy, they were my apology for a love I didn't know how to show. I sank into a chair, the wood creaking beneath me. The ticking started again, faint, coming from my bag. I'd forgotten the clock I carried from the mansion, tucked beneath my clothes. I placed it on the table beside the photograph. The rhythm was the same beat as the house, the same beat as the study, full circle. Under the table, something caught my eye, a panel slightly out of place. I pulled it open. Beneath was a small floor safe. The silver key fit perfectly. No gold, no deeds, just envelopes. Each one labeled Isolde, Heath, Eliza, the last one, mine. Your inheritance isn't the house or the money. It's freedom from the need to be chosen. Live, Vesper. Leave this place. Make something untouched by our sins. It wasn't cruel. It wasn't apologetic. It was real. I leaned back, the letter still in my hand, and understood. His death had forced all of us to see what we were. Not heirs, not soldiers. Just broken people holding on to things that were never ours to begin with. The poison had never been the pills. It was the control, the legacy, the illusion that power made us whole. By the time the sun stretched across the horizon, the sea had gone still. I stood outside, toes digging into the damp earth. From the cottage fireplace, I took a small tin of ashes. The last thing burned before the staff packed up the house. I let them scatter into the wind. They floated, weightless, until the waves claimed them. From behind me, I heard footsteps. Eliza stood at the edge of the path, her arms wrapped around herself. "What now?" she asked. I didn't hesitate. Now I stopped being an Ashbourne. I held up the key one last time, then threw it into the ocean. It sank without a splash. Eliza didn't move. Her eyes shone, but she didn't cry. We stood there until the sun touched the water. Months passed. I moved quietly, far from the mansion, the city, the reporters. I rented a small apartment by the coast. I worked part-time at the library. I slept without checking the locks. Some days, I didn't think about the estate at all. Others, I did, but not with grief. More like touching a scar and realizing it doesn't hurt anymore. That morning, I sat at a little cafe by the harbor, the kind with uneven chairs and chipped mugs. The sea air still carried salt, but now it smelled like something clean. A barista passed by, setting down a refill. "More coffee, Miss Ashburn?" I smiled. "Just Vesper, please." He nodded and walked away. I looked out at the horizon. The sky was wide and open. In the back of my mind, I heard my father's words. "Forgiveness is heavier than hate." And I let them stay. As I got up to leave, the clock behind the counter chimed. 11:11. I paused at the door, hand on the frame. Then I looked back one last time and whispered, "I made it, Dad.